Thank you, Nancy. And Rich, maybe when the clicker works, do you want to introduce yourself first, sir?
Okie dokie. So I'm Rich Gibbons, and I look after part of ITAM, part of SaaS, part of FinOps for Synyega. So many years of talking about them coming together. So this is a perfect opportunity to really drive that forward. So that's me.
Appreciate you joining us, Rich. And for anybody that doesn't know Rich Gibbons, he is the oracle of all things ITAM. I have a fantastic time and really enjoy spending time and having a conversation with Rich. And we presented together a few times. So Jeremy Chaplin, I lead our FinOps solution architecture and advisory practice globally here at Flexera. And of course, being part of the Flexera team here, we have an interest in all of those disciplines, having a really broad set of capabilities that span from all the way on-premise through now, of course, to the FinOps offerings. So that's why we've worked very closely with the Synyega team, in understanding how customers are leveraging and getting value from those combined disciplines. So what we really wanted to do today was kind of facilitate a little bit of a conversation and, of course, take questions as well. But I think we'll start maybe just with a discussion here ourselves, Rich, just around some of the kind of topics we've got on the slides here. But yeah, core responsibilities. You're the kind of ITAM expert in the room. How do you see that for the ITAM persona?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I first did my presentation on ITAM and FinOps in 2019. So I had several years of presenting to about 2 people who did not really know what I was talking about. So it's good that it's happening, and the responsibilities have changed over those 6 years. And I think, ITAM very much focused on software licensing, compliance, but over the years has become more focused on value and business priorities, which I think is where the convergence happens. But for ITAM, it's your Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, those big, long-term software purchases, making sure you're not overspending, you're not underspending, contract reviews, all that kind of thing. It tends to be where most ITAM practitioners are coming from.
Yeah, no, interesting there. I remember we presented in London in Covent Garden, which was probably the 3rd time that you tried to have a conversation about ITAM and FinOps, but that really resonated, I think, with the audience at that point in time. And it's quite interesting. We have a State of the Cloud report that we run every year and start to explore some of those responsibilities. But we're still seeing, the responsibility for licensing in cloud and in SaaS not necessarily sitting with the ITAM persona, despite all the expertise clearly being there, right? Which is odd.
Yeah, it's always surprised me. I don't think it's ever got into double digits. I think 9% was the highest, and I don't understand why. And you see a lot that it's infrastructure that are managing licenses in the cloud, but no one would ever ask them to manage licenses on premises. So it's an odd.
Yeah, it is an odd one, isn't it? And I'm not a licensing expert at all, and I listen to you and follow you, the LinkedIn posts and the updates that you give, and it's like a world of complexity. So why, as a cloud center of excellence, would I pretend to even have that knowledge? That you do it for decades, ultimately, right? It's complex.
Yeah, and that's what we say when we talk to ITAM practitioners, because there is an element of concern in the ITAM world that FinOps is coming and it's scopes and it's going to take over. But when you look at it, it's very much you need both sides. A FinOps practitioner, none of them I've ever spoken to wants to learn all the Microsoft licensing, Oracle licensing, and even if they did want to, they haven't got time to do it. So it's much easier to plug into the existing infrastructure and people, but there's still some sort of misalignment, shall we say, there, I think.
For sure. And I think we'll talk a little bit more later about the kind of partnership aspects, but you're absolutely right. Some feel threatened, and I think there's some language, Gartner has talked about the convergence of those disciplines, right? Which really kind of sounds like we're smashing them together and it's going to be, the body count at the end of it, right? But the reality is, for me, I think it's definitely a collaboration.
Yeah.
I don't have the expertise, and so what would I do in that situation? apart from asking ChatGPT, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. But, we go and ask the other expert in the room, right? There's an SME that knows the topic, knows the discipline, knows the nuances of licenses and entitlement. So, and I think we see from the customer base real success there, right? If you're trying to bring and force these things together, then people push back. But if it's a collaborative exercise and there's, and again on the slide here, the overlapping goals, the business outcomes that we're all working towards together, then the partnership works out and brings value.
Absolutely. And I think it's having the conversation of what are FinOps ultimately trying to do and what are ITAM ultimately trying to do. And when they realise that they are effectively the same, then it becomes much easier to say, oh, well, okay, you do this bit, I'll do this bit, greater than the sum of its parts.
Better together.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got some tooling that we're looking at in Flexera to help kind of with this in terms of, AI analysis of entitlements and contracts and things. Does that feel threatening, do you think, for the ITAM persona in terms of that's their expertise in terms of interpreting that? Or is that just going to be helpful overall?
I think for most people, it's going to be helpful. So the conversation of how AI can help ITAM tends to be around contracts, understanding what's in there, getting purchase orders in, lots of the kind of tedious, it's important, but it takes time. That, having AI do that is, for most people, what they want AI to do.
Yeah,
and then
repetitive.
You can do the more interesting, the more strategic things. But I do think FinOps is probably a little further along in terms of AI adoption. Mm-hmm. So ITAM can learn from what does and doesn't work in FinOps and cherry pick the best bits.
Yeah,
if we're sensible.
I think I have a bit of a trust issue with AI right now. Because of messaging around 70% of accuracy, and do I want to give my boss a report that I'm kind of maybe 2/3 of it might be right?
Well, I mean, this is one of my concerns. You're on the ITAM side. If you're doing a $100 million renewal with Oracle or Microsoft, and it's based on 70% accuracy. If it turns out that you're 30% under license now, that's going to be a big bill at the end. And I don't think, it's AI's fault. Will count.
Work. No, please send the bill to ChatGPT, and they'll sort that out for us. Yeah. And you touched there a little bit on the kind of goals as well, right? We're all hopefully aiming towards the same thing. But I think, my experience, at least of ITAM, is, yes, it's about business value, but as you said, it's also about avoidance of cost and, and audit avoidance and those kind of things. And those are maybe a little bit foreign to a FinOps practitioner. How do you see, again, the kind of collaboration there? Are you seeing kind of audit in cloud and those kind of things that means, again, the value is together?
So there are some. There was one a few years ago, an Oracle audit in AWS, where the customer had migrated into AWS, and they said, is it okay? Can we do this? The Amazon team went, yep, that's absolutely fine. But it turned out it wasn't fine. And it was one of those, clause 0.3, 0.1 of section 10 said, you can't do this. Because there were no ITAM people, no one ever read all the way through the contract. So there are little pockets like that. But I think one of the big ones for me, so Microsoft have their hybrid use benefit, and it's very much a case of, as a cloud engineer, tick this box, save some money. Yeah, I'll do that. And I think at some point we'll see Microsoft and similar vendors, once the cloud adoption is, kind of plateauing, then they'll come and say, right, actually, are you doing this? Is this compliant? And that is very much a perfect opportunity for ITAM and FinOps to work together.
Yeah.
Because ITAM professionals, they know what things publishers do and what you should look out for. Whereas FinOps people tend to be a little bit more, naive almost in what it's like to work with software publishers. So there's a big challenge, but also a big opportunity with that side.
Yeah. We don't have such exposure to the litigious nature and the nuance and complexity of contracts.
I think once you've seen, half a dozen audits arguing about what does the word user mean, then you start to realise contracts are less black and white than they appear.
And you had some interesting examples, I think, again, when we were presenting together in London about some of the kind of marketplace, contracts and things. Marketplace, of course, a big area where customers are starting to procure software, possibly because of the ease of the process and the lack of governance that sits around that. But I think you talked about a couple of situations where, customers were maybe committing themselves to be audited up to 3 years after using the software, and that you would be accountable to pay for the audit to happen.
Yeah,
there was some
legal fees and things, and that to an ITAM professional, a procurement professional, checking all those things should be sort of second nature. But again, if you're a cloud-focused person, speed is of the essence. It's there, I can do it. Why would you think to yourself, I wonder if there are loads of hidden clauses that will cost me 8 million, because it doesn't seem logical at all.
Fair.
Yeah. So there are absolutely quite a few areas where having some kind of guardrail, and the balance is always, ITAM is historically more about saying no or making things take a long time, whereas FinOps is more about saying yes and doing it, and we'll sort it out later.
Yeah.
So there can be a bit of a culture clash if you're trying to deploy something in AWS or in Azure, but you have to get legal to review the contract, and then procurement need to check whether it matches up with this other agreement, and people are like, well, I could just click buy. So that tends to be what happens.
And you touched on procurement there, and that was something I wanted to ask you about. We talk about the kind of ITAM and FinOps teams, but we very much got the kind of procurement persona in the middle there. How does the collaboration help with the procurement persona, do you think?
That's a great question, because even after all these years, ITAM and procurement don't always line up as well as they should do. And procurement will look at it as, well, this is what we bought last time, so this is what we'll buy next time. Maybe we'll factor in 5% growth or something. Whereas ITAM have got all this data to say, we don't need that and we need less of that, but they tend not to talk.
Yeah.
And that's when you're working on a contract that you're only doing every 5 years.
Okay.
And then when FinOps and cloud and then contracts are much shorter, I think it's even more difficult. But it really needs to be better, because you need to know what you're buying, how much you're paying for it, and why you're buying it. And we see a lot as well, the publishers, they love a long-term contract for various reasons. So procurement will work with them, you get a discount, you get these extra terms, yet we'll sign a 5-year deal. But then FinOps are working on a way of, dropping the spend and migrating off to a different platform. And without that communication, then you end up paying for things that you're not using and simultaneously paying for something else that you are using.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of customers come to us and they're kind of overcommitted. And it's like, well, we put all this effort into reducing your spend using, the FinOps framework and those approaches, but does that make a difference to the bill? No, you're committed to paying it. I think we refer to, or someone mentioned the term mega vendor. So a Microsoft where you're buying the on-prem, you're buying the SaaS for Office 365 and all of their other, SaaS application suite, and then you're buying Azure as well. And so working with procurement on the aggregate of that spend and using that as a lever in negotiation.
Yeah, and Microsoft in particular, they're moving lots of the billing from per user to per something, consumption-based metrics, and all of that goes through your Azure bill.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is you're looking at your cloud spend, and then someone else is looking at your software spend, but Microsoft are slowly moving one into the other, which knocks your negotiations out of balance.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are, again, you need them to talk to each other, understand, well, if you buy that and you call it SaaS, but it's actually in the cloud, so that goes on this bill. So, yeah, there's...
it's complex. And AI, again, I think there's some real oddities in terms of how the licenses are and how, what is it per user, is it per query, is it per conversation? how does that affect the kind of discussions we're having between those two or three groups? Really?
I think the biggest thing is how much more difficult to forecast it becomes. Because if it's based on per user, you can say, right, we've got 20,000 users, we're going to hire some, so this is how many we need. But when something becomes based on, per message or per assist or per conversation, how you can sit down and say to Microsoft, right, we're going to use 87,409 conversations in the next 4 years. It's impossible. So we see more and more customers having to rely on the publisher to tell them how much to buy.
Okay. Wait, that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and more and more, AI, one of the interesting things, it spans all the types of software. So some of it is on premises, some of it is SaaS, some of it is cloud. Sometimes it's all of them at the same time. So how you budget, how you track it, it's a whole new world, really.
Yeah, and a lot of hidden cost as well. I think I went to upgrade my own Microsoft 365 family subscription, and it was $99 instead of $79 or whatever. Yeah, and that's because they'd opted me into all of the AI Copilot and all of the gimmicks and everything else. So, and you had to kind of literally go in and say, no, I don't want these things, or I'm not paying for these things on a per user basis or whatever it was. So, some interesting challenges there for sure. So, moving on a bit, really, how do we think that the two teams can kind of come together, right? How do we build those partnerships together?
I think finding something in common is the first thing to do. And me, because my background is Microsoft, I tend to focus on the hybrid use benefit. So it's a software license that allows you to do something in the cloud. So no one team can have all the information. So you have to work together, and either you're not using the benefit, so your FinOps team aren't optimizing as well as they could, or you are using the benefit, but potentially have become non-compliant because you're using too much of it. So that to me is a great, starting point. There's an immediate impact. There's not really any worry about people stepping on each other's toes. And I think once you've done that and you realise that actually these people, they are friendly, and that for me will snowball into other things.
Yeah.
But I think the hardest thing is, and it's still the case now, that ITAM people and FinOps people can't always see how similar they are. And sometimes it's corporate politics, that there is an element of, well, because they're doing this, we've lost a budget to do that. So you kind of get a rivalry.
Them and us kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that common goal, whether it's to, if you're as advanced as getting to unit economics, and if you factor in your software, and there's always something to start. And once you've done that.
Yeah, the Microsoft one is the obvious use case, isn't it? Tick the box because I've got a Windows license, tick the box because I've got a SQL license. And it's so easy to do, as somebody who's deploying, resources or applications or infrastructure. How do Microsoft govern that? Have you got insight into because I can just keep ticking that box as far as I'm concerned, but what happens on the other side? How do they say you're compliant, you're not compliant?
So they do now, you can get a report from Azure which will show you all your resources with that ticked. But Microsoft, they don't give you any way of lining that up with your purchases. So that's on the customer to get your licensing, get your cloud, put it together. But if they wanted to, they could do. And I think back to the point about cloud audits, at some point, Microsoft will line the two systems up, and there will be, then they'll be able to say, right, you've got 1,000 licenses, well, you're using 7,000 of the benefit. There's a gap.
And I promise we didn't set this up, but we have a tool to help with that. Which I must mention now that you've suggested and talked about it. But yeah, bringing that data together is actually quite challenging. Even in the case of Microsoft, where that is their specialism, and bringing your own licensing is relatively easy, just because of the nuances of, hey, I have enterprise edition or the database, a data center SKU or whatever, and that means I can use it in production for 6 months, or it's still not easy, right? Even if you've got the data, and that's of course where the tooling is helping.
Yeah, and I think it becomes key at renewal as well, because from a software perspective, you might think, well, we've moved a lot of this to the cloud. We don't have as many servers, so we don't need as many server licenses.
Yeah.
So I will very, very carefully reduce our spend. Brilliant. But then on the other side of the fence in FinOps, you've just suddenly become massively non-compliant, or your bill goes up by 2 million or whatever it might be. So being able to see the data together will be really useful for proper renewals.
Yeah, and we've seen some really effective savings and opportunities to reduce cost by leveraging that tool. For the partnership piece, I think where we've seen a lot of success as well is where maybe an ITAM practitioner has been asked to run FinOps functions, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Just because they've got the experience and the other lens, right? They've seen it from the other side, and then being able to kind of then bring that expertise, but run a FinOps team, or bring the FinOps experience and get involved and learn some of the nuances of ITAM. That's been really successful. Do you see any other successful approaches that your customers are taking?
So we generally see, up until recently, there were more ITAM people that were picking up bits of FinOps, or mainly because Microsoft. It tends to start with Microsoft. Most roads lead back to Microsoft, and because it's such a big software spend and they're a hyperscaler, it makes sense to follow that. But more and more, especially now with FinOps scopes, FinOps people are picking up bits of ITAM, and I think it's quite interesting that they start to do it, and you think, oh, I can do this. And then they get a little bit further and go, oh my God, no. And then,
can you help me, please?
And then the collaboration piece comes in, because you think, well, there's got to be someone else that can do some of this work, and it goes from there. And so I think it tends to be driven more kind of bottom up, where it's practitioners picking things up rather than an executive level saying we should consolidate this. So I think the next step will be more of an executive-led merging. We'll see.
And an education and kind of common taxonomy piece as well. I mean, you post some things about Microsoft licenses and the new changes, and I click on it and open it, and I get so far, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about anymore. Right? It's, everybody's got their acronyms and everything else, and so it becomes quickly complicated. But at least to have a foundational level, common language.
Yeah, and I think
on both sides,
the biggest thing with that is still SaaS. So if you ask an ITAM practitioner what SaaS is, it's Microsoft 365, it's Adobe, it's Salesforce. If you ask a FinOps practitioner, it's Databricks, Snowflake, New Relic, completely different products, completely different models. But I've seen ITAM practitioners and FinOps people talk to each other for like 15, 20 minutes about SaaS, and they think they're agreeing.
Yeah.
But as a third-party observer, they're like, no, this is...
Absolutely. I try and clarify, technical SaaS, business SaaS, to try and break that out. And the other one that we see quite commonly is customers saying, it's a SaaS application. What they mean is they bought it through Marketplace. So that's the kind of third dimension of it as well.
Yeah, so, that does confuse matters further.
Aligning on that. Do we see, let's move on the tools and data sources side of things. Can we collaborate? Can we share? Is it a common set of data? Is there, there's a better together story clearly, because that's what Flexera is achieving. But what's your perspective there?
Yeah, I think ITAM is built on data really, and FinOps is heavily focused on data, so it should line up really nicely. I think the raw data is still quite different. So having tools that can help you marry it up is massively important. You've got the focus, which includes certain SaaS applications, and again to mention Microsoft. With Microsoft 365, depending how you buy, what type of agreement you have, you can get Microsoft 365 data as focus data, but only on one agreement, not on another agreement. So
it's never easy. It's never that simple.
No. So I think they're almost using the need for data parity as a mechanism to maneuver their customers, which I think shows how important it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, ultimately you want to be able to look at it, and whether it's SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, whatever, it's a thing, and you're paying for it, and you can calculate it. But I think we're a long way away from that.
It's challenging. It's certainly something that Flexera tries to address on the kind of common data layer, the normalization of things, right? What do I call a Windows server or a SQL server in cloud versus what is it on my entitlement, or what has my ITAM and asset discovery tool come back with, right?
Yeah.
Because as you say, SaaS isn't SaaS to anybody, and a Windows license doesn't necessarily translate.
No, and sometimes a core isn't even a core. vCores, and some people mean a CPU So yeah, I think that there's a long way to go, but ultimately both sides love data, so they should find the common ground there.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other insights in terms of how AI can help there? Flexera, again, I talked about the kind of, can I scan a page? Can I get the entitlement information out there? And of course, we're seeing, the natural language models where I can ask a question. There's kind of two disciplines, I guess. One is the FinOps for AI, right? How do I save money on the AI investment that I'm spending? And to your point, well, how do I even know what I'm consuming? And then there's the AI for FinOps, natural language, ask the question, maybe get 70% accuracy if you're lucky. But there's a real challenge in measuring value, I think, out of that as well. Everybody's spending money, it's the buzzword and everything else, but how would I, as a practitioner, what I'm trying to do in the FinOps space is say the business value of your investment in cloud or these assets is this, because we're seeing growth in or reduction in unit cost and a growth in your revenues and everything else. Can I do that with AI?
Well, it sort of depends who you ask.
I'm asking you.
Well, I think for me, I think AI, like we said, it can do some of the kind of legwork. But I also think there's a real opportunity. AI has been very successful in spotting patterns in things that we can't see. And I think there's probably a really good opportunity when we get to having all the data in one place, where AI will perhaps be able to say, when you buy these licenses, or when you do this over here, your cloud spend spikes or drops or usage changes, and that will help organizations realize, when we pull that lever, this happens. So I think that's maybe a little bit further away, but that I think is where AI can be very useful, and then the humans can act upon it.
Yeah, it's a big data challenge that's almost too big for us to perceive, particularly in the FinOps data, where it's very granular per minute or per second billing, and you've got a million lines that you can't open in an Excel spreadsheet, let alone, in tooling. So
yeah, and coupled with then on the other side, the ITAM data, it only changes every year or every 5 years. So how do you marry up? Well, this thing will change in 2031, and this thing will change,
in a minute's time.
Yeah, but somehow they are connected. So that I think is where it can go. But ROI of AI in general is such a big thing of whether it's a Microsoft Copilot or a cloud. How do you say, right, we've spent this much money on this AI thing, and this is how much better off we are than if we hadn't spent it? That is a perennial question, and I think, again, it's a problem for ITAM, it's a problem for FinOps. So hopefully that might be the common ground to start the conversation. Yeah. But AI is, it definitely has its uses. But I find myself, I'm surprisingly skeptical about it in certain areas. I think the Gartner hype cycle.
Yeah.
I think we're very much at the peak of inflated expectation. And I think we are due to come down.
Are you still generating all your slides with AI? The trend towards that direction. Some quite interesting images.
Yeah, I mean, I do like a bit of AI image generation. Some of them work perfectly, and some of them are so the opposite of what I tried to get that I actually quite like them. So it has its uses, but again, whether I would use that for anything massively important, probably not.
Yeah. Last topic we wanted to kind of cover, and we hear this a lot from our customers, is, I'm over here as an ITAM practitioner, or I'm over here as a FinOps practitioner. What are the kind of practical steps that take me towards, that convergence, that collaboration? Have you got any kind of best practices or guidance or encouragement for customers to make that first step? What is it that we would do, and in kind of what order to try and bring these things better closer together?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always a big fan of training and education. So I think for ITAM practitioners, I always say, do at least the intro to FinOps course, and then a little bit further down the line, the practitioner course. But also, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they've all got free excellent courses on clouds in general. I think it's really good. I still talk to ITAM professionals that aren't really sure what cloud is or how it's broken down. So I think it's good for them to learn that. And equally, I think for FinOps practitioners to learn more about licensing and the different metrics, not real into the detail, but just the idea of servers, cores, users, that this is a whole world. And I think anything around contracts is always important. And then go and find your counterpart. I did an event a couple of years ago in Vegas, and we had mainly ITAM practitioners. And I said, right, who knows, who's got a FinOps team? No one put their hand up. And we had Rob Martin from the foundation with us. Yeah. And he kind of got up and went, bit awkward, but I know the FinOps team in all of your companies. And he had to sort of go around and say, right, you need to email Tracy, and you need to talk to Kevin. And that's still, so it sounds ridiculous to say, get up and find them, but I think that's the...
Break down the silos.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't agree more with the education. I think, Synyega, you do FinOps certified practitioner courses?
Yeah. So we've got a couple of certified trainers, of which I'm one, and we find it's really useful. You can see the light bulbs and things clicking into place. And to your point earlier about the common language, the people, by the end of the training, they're just more familiar with the framework. And when we talk about a capability or a domain, and that makes the next conversation easier. So yeah, we're a big fan of at least that entry level training.
Yeah. And I think they have like FinOps for engineering, FinOps for Kubernetes. Can we expect to see a FinOps for ITAM coming soon?
Well, they mentioned, JR mentioned in the keynote, they've got FinOps for SaaS.
Okay.
Which I think is probably as far as we'll get, because the problem is, as someone who has designed and delivered ITAM training over the years, as soon as you say one bit and you think, well, if I'm going to say that, we'll have to talk about this bit, and that means we need to talk about, and then
it's a 6-week course, is what
yeah, and I think I think it would be a bigger job than anyone wanted to do. But I think there will be the FinOps for SaaS. I think in the ITAM world that there will be, I'm halfway through a kind of ITAM for FinOps course that we're building that I think explains some of the fundamentals. So I think bits like that will help it all come together.
Get the building blocks in. Rich, honestly, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm going to move on now and see if there's any questions that we have from the audience. We also have a QR code where you can download some great resources, so that's definitely worth going and taking a look at. But any questions at all from the audience we can take?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question so much as a comment, but I loved how you talked about, building this common language. It reminded me of FinOps early days when we talked about needing to build a common language with the finance teams and how you live in these totally separate worlds. And, there's a lot of common goals there. But until you start to speak with each other and help each other understand, help the finance team understand technical terms and help the technical teams understand finance terms, you can't really collaborate. And it feels like a similar thing is happening now between ITAM and FinOps, where, you have deep expertise in each of your areas, and now you have to kind of start to build a common language so that you can both work together towards those common goals. So
yeah, it's interesting. And you mentioned the finance piece, and we talk about amortized and unamortized cost and everything else. But actually, even though I've been working hard, on the understanding the proper definition of those, you'll go elsewhere and they don't use that language, or they have a different interpretation, or AWS will do it one way, or Microsoft will do it another. And so my guidance and advice there is, yes, you want to set out a common taxonomy, but you need to continue to revise, refresh it. People, of course, organizations change and people come and go. And so don't just assume that when I say, hey, yeah, I'm talking about amortized cost, that somebody else knows what they mean, right? And I'm sure it's the same for you.
Very much so, yeah. And it's sometimes it seems daft, but at the start of a meeting, you almost need to say, right, when I say this word, this is what I mean. And then, is that what you mean? Yes, excellent. We can carry on. And to your point, you do have to keep doing it because things change, or your company might always do it this way. You get a new CFO, and they report differently, and so yeah, it's a constant process. But if you end up talking at cross purposes, then everything else afterwards
it becomes a waste of time.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah. To your point, talking about SaaS applications that are not the same. So, great question.
Sort of to piggyback on that, because the two divisions are so siloed, if you are talking with a customer that is looking into the collaboration of bringing those together, they're so siloed that this is my spend, this is my savings. How do you bring that together? Is there a way to signify or find the ROI in the collaboration of those two teams?
Yeah, I'll take it first if that's okay, Rich. But executive sponsorship, I think, is really important there, right? So the business goals are aligned, and ultimately, we're seeing quite often now ITAM and FinOps teams reporting into the same, business lines. So being able to have, common KPI or however you're kind of incentivized and measured common goals, organizationally, they're absolutely aligned, right? This is about value realization, but you're right that people have different kind of goals within their teams and cascaded down different parts of the organization. But now, as things are starting to align, and maybe they're under the CTO or COO, organizations, less of that is a problem, but it still exists. As you say, the silos are still there, but all of the kind of messaging and the things that the foundation doing with scopes and other things, and Synyega, providing advice on helping break that down. But it's still a journey to take for sure.
Yeah, I think again, it's that finding the common bit, and Microsoft tends to be the place to start, because it will be on-premises spend, it will be cloud spend, and we see some organizations where the FinOps team, it's all optimized brilliantly, they've got the unit economics and effective savings rates, it's all amazing. But then on the other side, they're massively over licensed for this and that. So your Microsoft isn't optimized at all, really. So sometimes, or it might be Oracle or Salesforce, or bringing them together to say, look, these two bits of spend, we need them to add up to this rather than being individual numbers. I think that tends to be a good place to start.
Great stuff. Thank you. Great question. All right. What we'll do is just move on, close out now. We'd love, of course, for those in the room to join us at Roy's. I'd like to say it's my birthday party, but I think it was arranged before I told everyone that it was my birthday. But yeah, very excited to see you, and I'm sure we'll have a great time. 7:30 over at Roy's there. So please do come and join us. Really appreciate you visiting the stage. Please do come and see us at the booth 4. I'm going to be heading down there now, and already had some great conversations. Looking forward to more of that. And then lastly, we'd love for you to connect with us on LinkedIn, right?
Absolutely, yeah. If we aren't already, then we should definitely fix that. Whether it's FinOps, ITAM, hip hop, whatever it is, connect with me and we will chat away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, Richard.
You too, as always. Thank you.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.